Most health coaches look at your health through the lens of diet and exercise, which is absolutely a start. It's definitely an improvement over going to supplements and testing and all these things, working on the foundations and the basics. But today's guest, Zaid, looks at health through the lens of light first before he even touches these other things. I'm really excited for you to listen to this chat. We talk about parenting. He has a 1-year-old baby, so he's very well adept at circadian disruption in children. We talk about athletics and exercise timing, circadian disruption with exercise, and so much more. So make sure that you head down to the show notes to follow Zaid. I know he is much more active over on Twitter X, but he is beginning to build a little bit of a following on Instagram, and he puts out really valuable information that is extremely educational and makes a lot of sense. So I know you're going to enjoy this conversation, and let's go ahead and jump into it. If you're anything like me, I avoided olive oil for years and years due to a lot of the talk around olive oils not really being what they say they are and not really finding a brand that I can trust in the store. The problem with a lot of store-bought olive oils is that number one, they can be cut with seed oils, which we do our best to avoid at all costs. And the polyphenol content has also a lot of the time been degraded because it's been sitting on the shelf for years and years, and there may not be any polyphenols left in the product. That's why I have been using and really enjoying Paleo Valley olive oil, and they ensure they have the highest quality product and fresh pressed olive oil. It's been tested and shown to contain high levels of polyphenols. The olives are handpicked and cold pressed within hours of harvesting to ensure the best quality and the highest polyphenol levels. This is going to result in a much higher concentration of these beneficial compounds compared to standard olive oils. They're also not cut with any seed oils, so you can really trust that you're getting the best high quality product for you and your family. If you want a special savings on the Paleo Valley olive oil, head to the link down in the show notes to get a special discount. Today's show is brought to you by Upgraded Formulas. They have my absolute favorite magnesium. You can get the best and only clinically studied stabilized nano magnesium supplement on the market from Upgraded Formulas using my code YOGI for 10% off. Did you know that magnesium is actually required for over 800 enzymatic reactions in the body? This clinically studied magnesium has proven to improve sleep quality and energy by over 60%, specifically improving light sleep measurement by 90%, REM sleep by 150%, and deep sleep by 250%. That means more energy, better mood, and deeper sleep. Who doesn't want that? What makes this the best on the market? This specific magnesium is nano magnesium, which means it is easier for your body to absorb and use. In fact, it is absorbed up to 99.99%, which means you'll feel the results instantaneously. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have Zaid here with me to talk about all things circadian biology, his story, and we'll just see what comes out of the conversation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm definitely excited for this conversation, and let's get circadian biology to the masses.
Agree. I think the more of us talking about it, the better. And it's funny, I don't think I told you this in our messages, but my husband is, you know how it is. Your wife is like super into something and you're like, oh God, and here's another thing. And the man's been with me 20 years. He's like, okay, she's done like raw vegan, the yoga teacher thing, 12 years. Now she's all into like this light stuff, which I have been for the last 5 years or so. And so he's kind of like, okay, I'm slow adopting. You know, he thinks there's some validity to it. Obviously, he's seen it work wonders for me, but I like it when he finds voices that speak to him because he listening to me is just different. And so he actually had brought me, I think, a clip off of Twitter X where you were talking about AirPods on an interview. I'm like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you that.
I did not know that. That's incredible, and it does make sense
Yeah.
because that one clip, I think it's at like 2 million, so it's at some crazy number.
That's so cool. I love it. Yeah, he brought that to me and I was like, who is this guy? Who is this person who like, because usually he'll bring me something and I'm like, Yeah, I know. Like, okay, we've been talking about that in the health world forever, but this is something that the way that you explained it, and I just was like, okay, this guy gets it. And so that's where I was like, let me find him. I don't do Twitter X, but I found you on Instagram and I started following you after that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really great content. So that's the story of how I came across your stuff, was like through my husband, was like, this guy, I think he knows what he's talking about. I'm like, yeah, I think he does. So
That's awesome to hear.
yeah. Maybe we talk about your story and a little bit about how you got into this work, because that's always an interesting angle to take.
Yeah, so and I've described my history quite a bit, but basically I was I was a competitive soccer athlete ever since the age of 4. You head into when I was 18, 19 years old, I was traveling across the world to try to pursue the game professionally. That's always been my childhood dream. So, England, Costa Rica, Ireland, different places like that, just to be able to have an opportunity at, playing the game professionally. And so fast forward to around 2014, 2015, my dad actually had his second heart attack. So
Mhm.
myocardial infarction, which landed him into a coma that led down the route of hospice and whatnot, and eventually led to his passing. And so for me, that was a pivotal experience to get into overall health and basically, become I didn't set out to become a coach per se, but I wanted to learn as much as I could about the overall realm of health and wellness. And so maybe 3 to 4 years after that, started getting to nutrition, exercise, movement, a whole bunch of other things. But basically, that led me down the rabbit hole of circadian biology. And ever since I listened to that first episode of the Tetragrammaton podcast with Cruz, Rubin, Huberman, that blew my mind wide open. And I basically made a vow to myself that I had to explore this realm at its depth and understand as much as I could, because I really wanted the answers as to what happened to my father. And a lot of the centralized stuff just didn't appeal to me. I mean, you go into things like the endothelial glycocalyx, ApoB. It just didn't sit right with me at a core level. And so that's where I believe I found my answers with circadian biology.
Yeah. I feel like that's the story of so many of us that are in this space. It's just like, yeah, we did the health coaching thing, the alternative health coaching thing. We know that what's in the mainstream is wrong. We know it's not helping people and people are stuck. But then it's like, so what is the, where do we go from here? And that's where I think a lot of us stumble into this information. And certainly Jack and the stuff that he puts out there as well is really brilliant. And so, um, very cool. And so were you coaching people at the time, or how did that transform like what you were doing when you found the information?
Maybe the first 5 to 7 years of going into overall health, I was not coaching anybody. I was just learning as much as I could, just building my overall framework around this stuff. And then I would say maybe within the past 3 or 4 years, I started to coach people, and just randomly, because I got my start mainly on Twitter. That's where I grew a large audience, and that's where I mainly spend most of my time. And so,
Mhm.
just sending DMs back and forth, people start getting interested in the health content, and from there, one client after another. And I'm very blessed to be able to work with clients one on one with the circadian stuff, because I feel like this is an area that's underserved, and
Mhm.
it's an area that blows people's minds, to say the least, because they're not exposed to this information. And so if you
Mhm.
can package that information up into a framework that also applies to people's lifestyles that they can implement practically, that's everything for me.
I agree. What does that look like for, like, let's say your average client comes to you? How do you work with them and kind of explain these concepts to them?
Well, for me, I like to take a comprehensive approach. So, of course, the circadian piece is like the number one keystone pillar that holds everything else together. But I also focus on nutrition, exercise, all of that stuff through a circadian lens for the most part. And so, the way I try to break it down for people is, number one, what are you actively doing right now in your lifestyle? Number two, what sort of symptoms or chronic conditions are you dealing with? To then give us an indicator as to what your health status is. And then from there, it's just about making sustainable changes over time, while also not sugarcoating it. Because I feel like if you oversimplify the work, there's a large part of the magic and the nuance that's lost. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of striking this fine balance, but basically just making sustainable, progressive change. That's all the game
Yeah,
is.
I agree. Yeah, it's people think, I think it's too simple to be true. I think I run into that a lot. And they're like, that's where I was. I was just skeptical. And I think I had to get to a point with my own health where I was like, all right, well, literally, what do I have to lose by going outdoors more and changing a few things in about my indoor environment and my evening routine? Like, how is that really? It's not going to hurt anything to do that. But people are super resistant to it because I think it's just so ridiculously simple. I'm sure you come across that a lot as well, right?
Yeah, people find it hard to believe, and I think that a large part of this work is actually tackling the mental viruses, for lack of a better word. Like you have a lot of poor ideas that
Mm-hmm.
have found their way into people's worldviews, and I think that's probably the toughest part because once you can start to break that down and then you implement, you start to maybe show a few scientific studies that pique somebody's interest, or you show some testimonials of somebody getting results. From that point forward, it's relatively easy to have people do the work because they're bought in. But it's just that initial phase to where somebody doesn't know about circadian biology at all the way until, that early point where they do catch interest. And so I think the main battle here for me is, and for other people, is really tackling the mental viruses that are involved with this work because there are quite a few of them.
Yeah. You want to talk about some of those that you encounter and then how you deal with them?
Yeah, the one I talk about the most is this idea that UV light inherently causes skin cancer. So UV light from the sun specifically, because I think that people have a misunderstanding around how a lot of the research is done. If you take a look at centralized medicine and how they actually approach the research on UV light, it's always UV light in isolation. It's done in an artificially blue lit lab. You have there, the test subjects, which are often nocturnal animals, are bathed in non-native EMF. So it's about as far from nature as you can get. And my standpoint has always been that's not going to be a great indicator as to what happens in nature with a circadian diurnal creature such as human beings. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's one example. You have modern dermatology pushing out the idea that a tan is inherently a sign of skin damage and
Mm-hmm.
exclusively a sign of skin damage. But going through the research on melanin and a lot of the other stuff around it, that's just blatantly false. Um,
Yeah.
and so those
Yeah,
are a
you
few.
had an interesting post about the what is it called that they have like that special camera that can show quote unquote sun damage on somebody's face. Do you know what
Oh,
I'm talking about? The post that you did?
I think it's a NIvea scan. I might be wrong on that, but I
Yes.
think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
yeah. That's exactly what it is. Yep. Yeah, because I had always seen that and I'm like, oh, that looks really bad. But you basically were talking about how I mean, if people are like, what are you talking about? Is essentially you'll see those in like beauty magazines where they're trying to sell you some sort of like sunscreen makeup or sunscreen skincare to show you like, oh, maybe you can't see the actual damage on your skin. It looks okay. But when we use this special technology, you've got all this damage below the surface. And I even see that sometimes still on social media. Again, if someone's trying to sell like some sort of a laser therapy or a skin, usually some sort of a sunscreen type of product. So, yeah, I would love to hear you talk about what you uncovered with that whole deal.
Well, I had kind of the same thought process. I mean, if you look at the picture, you're kind of in shock to begin with because you don't have any context as to what it is. And so you might assume it's damage, but if you actually go through the explanation of what these scans are supposed to pick up on, it's just melanin production. Like they're just picking up on melanocytes. And so it ties in perfectly with the idea that dermatology is pushing, or centralized dermatology, which is that a tan is inherently a sign of skin damage, and it's just not healthy for human beings. But again, if we can break down that original assumption, then in reality, this scan is not showing. I mean, it shows other components, but mainly what they're focusing on is the fact that it's just showing melanocytes and melanin production.
Right. Which is not inherently bad unless you're talking to a centralized dermatologist, right?
It's actually inherently good. And I think the
Right.
funny thing in this realm is that a lot of things are upside down.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, having melanin production in areas of any part of the skin is inherently good because through the literature, melanin shows a wide variety of benefits. I mean, you could talk about its antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory, the fact that it's Mother Nature's natural sunscreen. Eumelanin protects against 99% of all UV. And while pheomelanin, a different type, it's not as protective as eumelanin, it still protects. And I've seen this in people such as redheads who have been able to withstand a lot more sun exposure.
Yeah, and it can sequester heavy metals. Like there's so melanin, I feel like is like a superpower, to be honest with you. And I mean, everyone I think they inherently know that they feel better with a tan, but again, we just have had this conditioning of like, it's so dangerous, it's so bad. And this is not to say like somebody who's like a Fitzpatrick one should go out and lay out in the sun for 6 hours a day. You have to prep your skin. You have to have good circadian rhythms. You got to block artificial light at night. There's prep work that you have to do to get your body able to be in that sort of environment. And I still have thoughts about someone who is like a, H2 like myself, mitochondrial haplotype, needing to live on the equator to be healthy. I still think like I can thrive pretty well here in the 33rd latitude. I don't know that we are meant to be in high UV year round. That's not even like how we evolved. That's like a whole other conversation. But to think that it's dangerous and bad, that's a whole other conversation. Like it's, I don't know, people are just confused about the whole thing. And I think they're really afraid because of all the melanoma talk. And it's just gotten like
Yeah.
really, really prevalent now. The melanoma is definitely on the rise. And so there's a lot of fear around the topic as well.
Yeah, for me, it's always been about understanding the context of a lot of this work. Like if we, depending on what you believe, if you believe in evolutionary biology and natural selection, or if you come from a more religious minded household, I think that at the end of the day, we can see these mechanisms at work in nature. And the very fact that melanin and circadian rhythms have been conserved across most species for hundreds of millions of years, that for me is a big indicator that we need to revisit a lot of these ideas that have found themselves in society.
I agree. So I know you get into some interesting debates with dermatologists on Twitter. Maybe we can go there a little bit and talk about, I mean, I'm sure you haven't really been able to change anyone's mind if that's their entire career and life's work, but how do those interactions typically go?
Well, some of them, I can't recall any that have been fruitful lately in the sense of changing somebody's mind. I think I do it more for the audience than, to try to change the mind of the individual that I'm talking to. But
Yeah.
it's really, I find the toxicity, for lack of a better term, a problem. And I am guilty of this as well because I've always approached the work through like, you have to have a little bit of spice and shock value to be able to get people interested and whatnot. But again, the way I approach it is I like to break it down systematically according to their worldview. So we can start from melanin, we can start from laying some context around the full light spectrum from the sun. I think the most clear example that I can give is like skin health as it relates to UV light. And the thing
Mm-hmm.
that I always bring up to people is if UV light was inherently toxic to the skin, why is it that at the highest UV index time, which is around noon or 1 p.m., depending on your location, why is it that most of the sun's spectrum contains red and infrared light? You have red
Mm-hmm.
in the visible spectrum, which is around like 42 to 45%. 50 to 55% is infrared, and only
Red,
3
yeah.
to 5% is UV light. And so if you go through the research and you study red and infrared, they directly stimulate the production of collagen, elastin, hyaluronic acid, which is huge in the skincare industry. And then if you're talking about the morning time and preparing the skin, then filaggrin and
Mm-hmm.
urocanic acid are more important talking points.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think people are so afraid. They just don't understand how the sun actually works. Like this morning, I was trying to put together a reel and I was going through, it'll give you like, here's some inspirational reels of people in your audience are watching these. And I saw this one uh, from this nutritionist and she's like, here's some things you probably didn't know. And one of the things was you can get all the vitamin D that you need in the morning as long as you're outside for 15 minutes. And I was like, oh my God. This reel had like a few million views. I'm like, oh my God, no, that's so incorrect. Like people just literally have no idea how this stuff works. And they think like I have to, wear sunglasses and sunscreen first thing in the morning. You'll go out on a walk in the morning and you'll see people out first thing in the morning when it's sunrise. There's not even UV available with sunglasses and a hat on. And you're like, oh man, this is so bad,
And that's why the education is so important.
Yeah.
Because the education is the foundation of it all, and it allows you to see and differentiate truth from non-truth. And so that's kind of how I've always approached the work. It's just, listen, we can let go of like the arguments, the debates, all that stuff. Let's focus on the work and let's see what the scientific evidence, along with a lot of the other anecdotal experiences, provide.
Right. And as far as the whole melanoma thing goes, I mean, I feel like it is a heavily blue lit environment. That's really one of the biggest issues. And I know you've looked into some of that as well and done some posts on it, but maybe we can talk about that here.
Yeah, so I mean, there are many points that we can touch upon. I mean, vitamin D3 from sunlight exposure. If you have a high level of D3, it automatically protects you against many forms of cancer. And this is actually one of my pinned threads on Twitter. It's just the going through every process that is actually meant to balance the body and protect you from any potential of developing cancer. So you can talk about senescence, autophagy, apoptosis. So people with a higher D3 automatically stand more protected against any form of cancer, especially melanoma. But if you take a look at people who have melanoma and they have a high D3, it's actually more beneficial in terms of reducing tumor size and just improving overall lifespan and longevity. And then you have various things. I mean, we can make the differentiation between melanoma and non-melanoma cancers because there's a lot of nuance there. But what we also need to understand is that apoptosis and autophagy, two of our biggest cancer-protecting cellular processes, operate on a circadian rhythm. As a matter of fact, every process in the body operates on a circadian pattern.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what kills me about a lot of the talk around fasting and keto. And, not to say that those things are inherently bad. I utilize a little bit of keto. I utilize some fasting and a circadian mechanism where I'm more likely to skip dinner. But what people are like, oh, I didn't eat anything till 2 o'clock today because I was doing my autophagy and apoptosis. I'm like, my friend, that happens at night when you're sleeping, as long as you're making enough melatonin. Uh, it's not necessarily extending your fasting window till 2 p.m. If anything, I'd rather you stop eating at 2 p.m. and then not eat again until the next day if you really want to maximize those things and block blue light at night, get sunlight exposure. It's like such a multifaceted conversation that's just, I don't know, the food conversation just starts to get so boring after a while. I don't know about you, but I'm just like, oh God,
That's exactly how I think of it now. I'm just like, I don't want to give any recommendations around food because, I mean, okay, eat nutrient-dense food, eat seasonally. There you go. What else do I need to talk about? And I think that if I look at the societal need, what people need in society when it comes to health messaging, it's not the food and exercise. It's not the supplementation. Because you can find companies and influencers talking about that day and night, 24/7. It's the circadian stuff, the light component, the grounding, all of that stuff is not only not touched upon, it's frowned upon. And so that's really the forefront of health.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a lot of it just feels so upside down. It's like, but when you can zoom out a little bit and look at things through this lens of circadian biology and even quantum biology, when you start to understand like some of Pollack's work and how the mitochondria work and kind of more on this like quantum level, I think that it just, again, you look at that stuff and you're like, why are we still arguing about diets? And I mean, because something that I eat, my diet, because I got it again this morning on a reel. Someone's like, can you please post your exact meals for a day? And I was like, why? It probably wouldn't be relevant to you, because I don't know where you live. I don't know what your goals are. If you're metabolically healthy, I don't know what time of year it is. If you're like on the other side of the world, like it's so hard for people to grasp that diet needs to be, to an extent, like there's some basic principles we follow with protein and local seasonal produce, but it has to be based on your level of leptin resistance and time of year, where you are on the planet, so many different factors. So it's like I almost don't even want to do videos like that because it's not going to be relevant for most people, you know? A lot of people are quick to talk about the benefits of sunlight, but what gets often missed in the conversation is the benefit of darkness and the importance of protecting yourself from blue and green light after sunset. That is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% off at Viva Rays. Now, you may have seen some of these studies popping up. I call them fear mongering about blue blockers not being effective. And that is a partial truth, because when you use blue blockers that are clear or that have not been tested with a spectrometer to actually block what they say they do, they will not protect your circadian rhythms. And they are not catching those key wavelengths that you need to be blocking in order for your body to be able to repair, for you to make melatonin, which is a master antioxidant. And artificial light at night has been in the scientific literature extensively linked to a host of hormonal cancers, obesity, diabetes, and all sorts of metabolic issues. That again is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms to allow my body to get adequate darkness at night. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays, and you can actually trust that they block the frequencies of light that they say they do. Thanks to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's podcast.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
also more difficult to give those recommendations because diet is such a or such a it's such a personalized thing according to your
Mm-hmm.
current health status. But if
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about circadian biology and light and a lot of this stuff, that is more fundamental than nutrition, and as a result, it's more universal. And so you
Yeah.
can give pretty solid recommendations for most people. Of course, there's going to be nuance, but for most people that will inevitably improve their health status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, for me, when I have people that come to me very food obsessed, I'm really eager to turn them to light because I think it helps quiet a lot of the quote unquote food noise for people. I mean, maybe we could talk about there are, neuropeptides and neurohormones that the sun allows our bodies to produce that can really, really help with satiety, with appetite, regulating those things so that the food noise or the obsession with food becomes less and less. I don't know if you see that with clients as well, but yeah.
Yeah, that's been a massive thing that I've seen. Um, and it actually does entirely flip your worldview on the power of light versus food and the independent
Mm-hmm.
power of light on metabolism and various things. But the POMC system, the pro-opium melanocortin system, is something I always refer to because the way I explain it is just a pathway in the brain that also finds itself in the skin and in other areas of the body that responds and takes in UV light more specifically to then create a lot of these peptide hormones that have wide-ranging impact on the body, especially metabolism. I mean, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much, if I'm correct, pretty much all of the peptide hormones produced from POMC are appetite suppressants. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, just that fact alone, we need to start investigating the power of sunlight in relation to hormonal profiles and overall, and also the battle against, obesity and chronic disease and whatnot.
Yeah, people will come and they're like, what do I do if I get like hunger in the afternoon? I get this energy dip. I'm like, simple. You just get a nice big glass of mineral water, go sit outside, do some grounding, go get a little bit of the, afternoon UVA is still great. Even if there's no UVB out there, you're still getting a lot of great benefits. Hydrate yourself, ground, get sunlight, because again, yeah, that's really going to do a lot for appetite regulation. And I see it also helping people. I don't know about you, but I see that afternoon, if they're able to get out, do some grounding, get some sunlight, drink a nice big glass of mineral water, that can carry over into the evening time as well. Especially if you're wearing your blue blockers to people who have a really bad habit, like I used to for years, of eating and snacking and drinking wine and doing all that stuff in front of the TV at night. Like that is hugely disrupting to health. And I think the afternoon sun time can help to give the brain and the body a little bit more of what it needs. So it craves a little bit of that, less of the dopamine and a little bit less of the food and all the other things that I think we're so addicted to as a society. I don't know if you see the same thing or not.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's always been a big one for me. And it's I like to point this out to people. If people, they stay up late, they watch TV, they have a huge meal, they don't understand the damage that that is incurring on their body because they don't have that relative experience. And so when I suggest blue light blockers, dark lens, to somebody after sunset, and they start to implement some of these practices, they can notice the relative difference. Like if I were to put somebody who's never put blue light blockers on and they're under artificial light, they're not gonna have that much awareness around how harsh it is for the eyes and the overall body.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, when I take somebody and put them on to, let's say, blue light blockers, they immediately notice. You can't help
Mm-hmm.
but notice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I finally got my husband on them after years of wearing them because he was like noticing that his vision was starting to go a little bit. And I'm like, you have to wear the blue light blockers. Like, please, I'm not crazy. And he did fine. He's like, fine, I don't want to lose my vision in my 40s. Like, this is stupid. And he started wearing them and he was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much more relaxed. And now he's like every night, he's like, oh, I've got to find my blue blockers. Like he's obsessed with them now, but you kind of have to experience it in order to really like see how much it impacts your physiology. And I'm like, I'll go to people's houses, not often, but I was visiting some relatives probably about a year ago. And it was like 9 o'clock at night, like all the overhead lights are on. It's like flashing fluorescent lights. And I'm just like, oh my God, how can you live in this sort of, and that's just par for the course. And you got the TV going. And I think it's just most of us are set up that way. And it's really, really destroying health. And it sounds like very woo-woo and very crazy, but maybe we can talk a little bit about that and then how you explain it. Cause I think you have a really good way of explaining this as well.
Yeah, with artificial light more specifically, or what around those lines?
Yeah, just the whole evening routine, artificial light, and how it's just really disrupting health.
Yeah, so I want to break this down as simply as I can without losing any of the magic behind it. So the entire reason why we want to block artificial blue light is not only because as a circadian creature who's designed to be in alignment with the light and dark cycle, we are not only not designed to be exposed to that type of light, but if we're talking about the hormonal perspective, it's just going to jack up cortisol chronically, and then it's going to absolutely decimate melatonin, the
Mm-hmm.
pineal form of melatonin more specifically. And so if you do that, I mean, you automatically set yourself up for acute problems and especially chronic problems if this is done night in, night out, which most people do. Um, and it's also destroying the opportunity for you to maximize sleep, which is where we restore the majority of our body. And
Yeah.
so if we can get that into people's minds and start to implement little things here and there while also just telling people to like maintain darkness, then I think that's a huge win. And people notice the difference, especially when it comes to sleep quality and then waking up the following morning. I've had many experiences of putting people onto this sort of regimen or framework, and they've they can't go back because
Mm-hmm.
now they understand how to actually utilize the light and dark cycle appropriately. And so it's absolutely shocking when you once you're circadian pilled and you look around,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everything is lit up by this type of light. And it's inherently damaging to the eyes, the brain, the skin, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much research available that shows artificial light at night at cancer, artificial light at night, and obesity, Alzheimer's, all these things. But I think a lot of people are like, okay, that's great. I've had people come at me and be like, oh, that's all correlation, not causation. You're grasping at straws. I'm like, okay, there's literally mountains and mountains of data on this. And if you decide that it's silly, then that's fine. But yeah, it is because of this destruction of melatonin, which is our master antioxidant, helps us heal, repair, do autophagy, apoptosis. Like, yeah, and it is like it's very just normal to walk into someone's home at 9 o'clock at night, have all the lights on, have TVs on, people be on their phone. and it's, yeah, our modern environments, and they're all LEDs and fluorescents, because why? Those are not, um, they're more energy efficient, and there's no infrared in our homes really for the most part anymore either.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've
Yeah.
been thinking about the sheer implications of this on society. I mean, if you're talking about the loss of productivity, the loss of income, the loss of
Mm-hmm.
health, I mean, this is just, it's absolutely astonishing. And I think that if we can even make a 3 to 5% dent and
Mm-hmm.
get like maybe 3 to 5% of the American population into this work, that would have massive implications in and of itself. Of course, we want everybody to change around these things, but again, it's unfortunate, and I think there's a lot of incentive structures designed to keep it that way and whatnot. But either way, just being in alignment with nature's light and dark cycle is everything.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people, they'll tell women over 40 when you're getting up towards perimenopause, menopause, like, oh, your sleep is just going to be messed up. Sorry. And I had a woman over the weekend. She's in her 60s and she's like, for 40 years, I struggle with my sleep. And I literally did all the things that you talk about here for free. And she's done like 4 of my courses. And she's like, and I can't thank you enough. Like, my entire life has changed. I'm sleeping. I feel better. I don't feel like I'm hunting for sugar and just crap that I used to put in my body. And I didn't even have to do anything drastic. It just really was the light routines. And I'm like, thank you. That's so awesome.
And imagine how much easier it would be for people en masse to be able to follow this work and then get better results with exercise, nutrition, and all
Mhm.
of the other things. I mean, that's really the key point. It's like how many people in this country fall off the exercise or nutrition bandwagon, hop back on, and then repeat that process and go through that vicious cycle over and over again. I mean, it's
Yeah.
countless number of people, and I think people will have a much easier time transitioning into this work if they did focus on the circadian stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my partner, Carrie, and I, we have a podcast, Quantum Conversations. We talk about this all the time of like being in our 40s, and I'm leaner now and in better shape in my mid 40s than I was in my mid 20s. And it's not hard. Like and it's not like I eat like this perfect, amazing diet. I do occasionally have stuff that I enjoy that I wouldn't put on Instagram, be like, oh, look what I'm eating. Like, I don't want to shove it in people's faces, but I will eat something that's like, for years that would cause me to go on like a massive binge or feel inflamed or feel terrible or sleep bad, even if I had it in the middle of the day. Like, my body can handle it now. And I think and it's not something I do like all the time, but it's just like, yeah, my body can deal with it. I'm more resilient. And I really feel at the core, it's the synchronization of light dark cycles, of seasons, that allows the body to become more resilient. I mean, your mitochondria are more healthy, and you don't have to pick up your phone and type everything you eat into it, or wear any kind of like tracking devices to measure all of your steps and exercise and track your workouts and all that. So I just see people doing that, and I'm like, God, that's freaking exhausting,
Uh,
you
I can only,
know?
and I like to optimize, so to speak, around the circadian stuff and be a lot more nerdy than other people. But that's only because I'm an educator and I understand the nuance between like following a certain path and then being able to let go of it as well, letting go of that
Mhm.
routine around maybe being a little bit more neurotic with optimization and whatnot. But most people don't need that. Most people just need the free actionable steps
Basics.
around, sunrise and blocking artificial light and whatnot. And so most of it
Yeah.
is accessible. It's just the lack of education and again those mind viruses that come in and destroy a lot of these ideas.
Exactly. And you mentioned a little bit more specialization and optimization. One thing I haven't done a ton on is talking about exercise, because I'll get that question a lot. When should I work out? And I'm just like, just as long as you're not doing it 5 o'clock in the morning fasted in the dark, or like right before bed, just any movement is probably better than like none at all, than like laying on your couch doing nothing. So I'm not really the one to talk about that, but it sounds like you've kind of honed in on that and maybe even created some protocols for people. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so exercise is just one of those external circadian cues that we call a Zeitgeber. So
Mhm.
within the overall discussion of circadian biology and your circadian rhythm, Zeitgebers are very important because they are basically these cues that either align your body circadian clocks properly, or if you use them incorrectly, they have the potential to throw everything out of sync. And as a result, hormonal function, systemic function takes a big hit from that. And so exercise is one of those circadian cues, which means there is a right and a wrong time, or in other words, there is an ideal and an unideal time to work out. And so from what I've seen, certainly waking up before sunrise is not ideal. I think that does more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
And that even throws people out for like, they're kind of confused as to why I would say exercise at the wrong time is more harmful than no exercise at all.
Oh, I
That's
think my audience will get that for sure.
yeah. But basically, you're sending the signal at the wrong time, and as a result,
Mhm.
that's going to have an impact on not only the master circadian clock, but also all of the peripheral clocks associated with it. And it seems like exercise maybe within an hour after waking up or two is not a bad thing. I think that in general it's a good thing from what I've seen. The most ideal time to exercise is afternoon, so anywhere between, I mean, it can be a pretty large window, but I say 1 to 4 p.m. Some people make the argument that it's 4 to 7 p.m., which, I don't have a problem with so long as you're not going too late into the night.
I think it's
Um,
time of year dependent because 7 p.m. in the middle of summer is going to look a lot different than 7 p.m. in the dead of winter.
Exactly. Seasonal creatures need to follow a seasonal appropriate type of framework around this work. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's mainly how I approach exercise. And honestly, I come at this from the background of being an athlete who has played under artificial light for, team practice and whatnot, 3 to 5 days a week. I did that for years. And I was young, so I could withstand it. But again, I feel like there are certain aspects of my health that took a big hit from that. And so I've just completely removed myself from that and focused more on daytime exercise and just trying to be more ideal around timing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for me, when I used to go to the gym and do a lot of workouts, now I really just try to do things here more. I've got equipment and I can kind of drag it outside and do it during the day. But I always felt like if I try to go first thing in the morning, that was how I basically wrecked my adrenals and like got my cortisol patterns all screwed up from trying to go at 5 o'clock in the morning when it was still dark, drinking black coffee in the car on the way there. I mean, you see that on Instagram, like my come with me on a day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you are just really messing yourself up by doing that. And when I quit doing that and I started just doing a workout that was a little more chill around 8 o'clock in the morning after breakfast, after getting some sunlight, my body immediately started to feel better. Um, and I felt guilty. I think a lot of people feel guilty for not doing the 5 a.m. workout, or I'll get from a lot of like really busy, stressed out parents like this 5 a.m. is the only time I have for myself. It's the only time I can work out. And I'm like, well, what's going on with your cortisol? Your cortisol is like really, really way too high in the morning. And then you're having these big, huge crashes in the afternoon. And then it's going up again uh, around sunset. And your cortisol patterns are a complete mess. And so I think for me, I don't know how you feel about this as like more of an athlete and maybe work with people that are looking into more of that health optimization. But for those people, I'm like, let's take some time off. Like, go for walks when you with your kids, or go, after work, just go for a walk on your lunch break at work. But let's just take that off the table for about a month and see if we can really get the circadian syncing, blood sugar, cortisol, melatonin patterns. Let's really see if we can get those in a better place. And then we can try to play around with being more strategic about how and when you work out. But I don't know if you get a lot of those clients or how you manage that situation either.
Yeah, we're starting to work with. So I'm partnered with a company called the Meta Warrior,
Mm.
which is also combined with Dex Fit here in Irvine, Southern California. But we're starting to work with a lot of athletes. I mean, we've had some big names come in, but again, this is another one of those mind viruses as to where people are confused because they think that exercise at any time at all cost is healthier than no exercise at all. And
Agree.
this is one of the tougher parts of educating on circadian biology because there's so much context you have to provide for people to understand that. Maybe not as much as you would imagine, but either way, you have to provide that context. And so the idea of going on a walk grounded on the beach instead of doing your CrossFit session for 2.5 hours, that's
Mm-hmm.
foreign to people. But that's exactly what people in this in this country need, because in general, most people are chronically stressed. And
Hmm.
if you add more stress to a chronically stressed system, that system will inevitably break. And that's what
Right.
people don't understand, especially the athletes, because the athletes are performing at such a high level that anything that's off will definitely throw um, a monkey wrench in the entire system. And so it is about, being more loving to your body, and taking more of a compassionate approach, or just taking a step back and realizing that you don't have to go David Goggins mode 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, that's like kind of the hustle culture that's out there now is like you have to, and you're a father too. Like you've got a baby that's about to be one. And I think once you become a parent, all the like hustle culture and like harder, faster, more, like, do all this like 75 hard type of stuff. It just is just like, there's got to be a better way to optimize my health and to live, than pushing so hard all the time and doing it rain or shine. It's like your body isn't built that way. Your body is built to go through different seasons and have seasons of rest too.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of those foundational, you can call it a universal truth. Like seasonal, like change is everything. Fluctuation is everything. And so there's always a yin yang to all of this stuff. I mean, it takes place from your hormones all the way to like the
Mhm.
large part of your life and in your routines. And so that's definitely the most important thing to understand here.
Yeah. And, speaking of circadian disruptors, you've got a son. Is it a son that's about to be one or a daughter?
Yeah, Enzo. His name's Enzo.
Ah, adorable. You put pictures of him on your in your stories every now and then. Yeah, it goes by too fast because mine's about to be two. And I'm like, oh
It really
gosh,
does. I
man.
never understood when parents with a lot of experience told me that, but then, now that I'm in it, I understand.
Yeah, the days are long, but the years are short. It's just like, wow, how did that fly by so quickly?
Yeah.
But I would definitely say that first year is it can be the most challenging for people with sleep. So I'd love to hear how you like kind of got this information, you're implementing it, teaching about it, studying it, and then you've got a baby, how you implemented it with the baby, because that's a question I get constantly and I have my own little spin on it too, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, so with the discussion of sleep, I actually take a very kind of effortless or like not complicated approach to it. I think that if you have the circadian stuff dialed in during the day, and
Hmm.
especially at night with the artificial light, in avoiding all that, the sleep is pretty much dialed in most of the time. I mean, you can argue about the accuracy of the Aura Ring, but my REM and deep sleep numbers are routinely above 2 hours each. That's not hard for me to achieve. And I think that if we have the circadian piece, the light and dark cycle in alignment, then you should be all good on that end. You don't need any of the supplements. You don't need any of the crazy biohacks. It's really
Yeah.
just, aligning yourself on that end. With Enzo, I mean, that was interesting because I was very grateful to be on the circadian train before he was born. And so a lot of it is just making sure we block artificial light ruthlessly.
Hmm.
Definitely minimizing any screen time. We make sure if he has screen time, he'll watch like Miss Rachel or The Wiggles for like 10-15 minutes during the day. But after sunset, there's no screens whatsoever. Everything is lit up in circadian friendly red bulbs. A lot of sun, but again, doing it progressively, building a tan.
Hmm.
Um, and I like to refer to the 1931 recommendations from the U.S. Department, I think it's Child's Bureau, Labor, yeah, Child's Bureau. They talk about how to actually build a tan for infants in
Really?
a perfect way, and this was done in the early 1900s. And I've gone
Wow.
through this entire brochure step by step, and they talk about the tan, they talk about opening the windows, they talk about seasonal change. When the UV index is high, you do this, vice versa. And so that's kind of how I approach it. But with the sleep and Enzo, I think that just going through, just making sure we have the fundamentals in check from a circadian
Hmm.
standpoint. That's all that matters to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because with babies, I mean, my son's very interested in my blue blockers now. I
True.
think I need to get him a pair. Like he thinks they're amazing because my husband wears them, I wear them, and so he really wants to wear the blue blockers. They're just a little big for him. But yeah, with a baby, like you can't really put blue blockers on them when they're that age, and so I think the circadian lighting is huge, and then not letting them have screen time, not having overhead lights on, and then how do you deal with wake ups in the night? I'm sure hopefully by now he's like sleeping more through the night, but my son for the first like 5, 6 months was not, was not sleeping through the night. And so it was like this whole, I've been doing circadian for a couple years before I had him. And then it was like, okay, now I have to like do a whole new level of like ingenuity with waking up to feed him and things like that. So how did you guys deal with that? And at least in the very beginning, I'm sure.
Well, in the beginning, I mean, I think that's just the natural process of like, having a newborn. There's going to be wake ups and there's going to be all sorts of different scenarios that you come across. I think that maybe parents have an idea that newborns are supposed to sleep through the night or something of that nature. But for us, we've always co-slept. And so I know that's a
That
hot
would do
topic
that
in and
too.
of itself. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so we take a pretty effortless approach to it and we just ride the wave. There's nothing special that we do. I mean, my wife is honestly incredible when it comes to the baby stuff and the prenatal care and all that. So I kind of let her handle the reins there, but again, just as long as I can be a little bit more strict in my control of the environment, the lighting situation and all that, I think that's helped us out a lot. And it's also something where we're not like religiously strict about it. Like every once in a while, Enzo will be under artificial light at night. And that
Hmm.
that just comes with the territory of being in this environment. And I don't
Hmm.
want parents to feel so much pressure to the point where they don't take action at all.
Right.
It's mainly about 80 to 90% of what you do that matters most.
Yes. Agree 100% with that. Cause like nobody lives a perfect life. Everyone does, even if they say they do online, like nobody lives perfectly. But I think you can look at somebody and be like, okay, I can see from how their skin looks and how their physique looks and like how they present themselves that they do have things dialed in. They do look healthy. Like you can look at my videos now and then go back to when I first started putting stuff on YouTube and like 2019, you're like, holy crap, like looks like a completely different person. It's like clearly I figured out how to dial this in, but I'm the first one to be like, I'm not perfect. Like you know, like there's just no such thing as perfection when you got two kids. One of them's a special needs child and then a toddler. It's just, you just got to do your best. I think the one thing that I'll see a lot of women do that are breastfeeding is they will get on their phone they're breastfeeding when they're on their phone. And I'm like, try not to do that during the day because you're exposing the baby to a ton of non-native EMF and it's near their head. And that's really, really, really bad for brain development, nervous system development. They don't have a fully developed brain or nervous system. And then two, if you do that at night, like you're going to wreck your uh, melatonin production, which is also going to come out through your breast milk and keep your baby awake more. And so that's a big mistake I see people, women making is breastfeeding and surfing on their phone, but buying stuff. I get it. Like you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're just like, oh man, you know. But with my son, I was like, we would just bring him in the bed and I would fall asleep half the time when I'm breastfeeding him. So it's just a different way of doing things, I think, and a different way to just like approach the whole situation in general, right?
Yeah, a more holistic and comprehensive way. I think that's what all parents aspire to, especially when it comes
Hmm.
to their child. And
Yep.
yeah, the the whole subject of infancy, especially as it relates to like breast milk, was very interesting to me from a circadian
Oh
standpoint
yeah.
because prior to maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, I had no idea that breast milk actually follows a circadian pattern. I did not
Hmm.
know that you can actually manipulate the compounds within breast milk if you follow a certain lifestyle. And to me, that's always
Hmm.
been crazy. So even just, even prior to birth, what the mother and the father are doing from a circadian standpoint has a huge impact on future kids' health and whatnot. So that's always been incredible to me.
Yeah. I think people just have no idea that it is going to impact your child. It's going to impact, I think my birth at age 42, 43 was so much easier than it was at age 28 in so many ways. It was just like way easier. And I really do attribute the quantum and circadian lifestyle to aiding in that. My recovery was easier. Everything was so much easier. And I'm like, over 40 doing this and it was harder in my 20s. And so it speaks volume about this lifestyle and optimizing things for your child, definitely. And that whole
And I do,
circadian breast milk is so fascinating.
yeah, and I do have a quick word on the I think the birthing process, because this has been a pivotal experience for me and my wife. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you have a plan, but don't hold on to that plan so tightly to where things
Mm-hmm.
become detrimental. Because we started off with a home birth. We hired Lisa Marie Oxenham is actually my wife's aunt. Yeah. And she's like one of the top, home birth midwives out there in the nation. But and she taught us so much, and it's been incredible. But we went in with a home birth, ended up having complications, had to do an emergency transport to the hospital. And for somebody like me who understands the deeper intricacies of the medical system and whatnot, who understands the circadian, the non-native EMF, that's
Oh
like
yeah.
diving into the lion's den. That's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that's the last thing you want. But at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, I think we came out of that experience stronger. And I just want to urge parents to understand, especially parents within this work who are educated, to to just to roll with the punches. You'll
Yeah.
figure it out. You'll be fine. It won't be a big deal at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's kids in general too. I think you have to have your values established, definitely, and be a strong front on that as a couple.
Yeah.
And then what's things are going to happen, and you don't want to have to utilize a centralized system, but it's there, it's there, and it can save lives. There's, like if you break a bone, you got to utilize that, and there are people that I think are terrified of that system for a very good reason. It's my daughter was injured by that system, and it kept me from having another kid for 15 years. And so we had a whole bunch of like, this is how it's going to be, and yeah, you still get humbled. As perfect as you want things to go, you're still like, it's human life. And there's only, you can have definitely some very, some control over things, but at the end of the day, you can't control everything. And so yeah, I think that's a whole you just got to roll with the punches, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
all for the betterment of your personality, your character and whatnot. And I think that at the end of the day, you go through more things and you're able to reflect on that, you'll just become a better human being.
Yeah, I always I'm like big into Dolores Cannon right now. I've been going through all of her stuff, and I'm always like, okay, where's the lesson here? Or I'll see people like troll me online or just be like really mean, and I'm like, oh, they're not learning their lesson. It's not for me to teach them either. I'm just like, okay, that's fine. That's
Just
fine.
let it go. No big deal.
They get to come back and repeat it, or they're going to just continue to repeat the same nightmare over and over again until they understand like what they're supposed to be learning from like that's how I look at it now, is like you don't figure it out, you get to repeat it. So have
Yeah.
fun with that. you know
Yeah. We all go through it.
yeah,
So it's just like, yeah, you're on your own journey.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And with non-native EMF, so your reel, or I guess it's a little video, you don't have reels on Twitter, kind of has gone viral, has gotten over 2 million views, and that's on Airpods and non-native EMF. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because that's one of those things, like I can get people on board with light, I can get people on board with nutrition, but then you're like, you need to take off your Apple Watch and you need to get rid of those AirPods. And then they're like, okay, now you've gone too far. Like you're completely
Don't
insane.
touch
So,
any
oh
of their Apple products.
my God. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
let's dive into that one a little bit.
it's definitely one that I've received a lot of pushback on. And I was, it's funny. I was actually let's start off with the problem with AirPods, at least from my perspective,
Mhm.
with the non-native EMF. So you have, let's talk about the inverse square law. This idea that
Mhm.
the farther you are away from the source of non-native EMF, the more protected you are, because there's just a huge drop off in the frequency. And so if you're abusing the inverse square law and putting an AirPod with 2.5 gigahertz signal, Bluetooth, straight into both of your ears, which, I mean, those frequencies are transmitted directly into the ear canal towards the brain. It's not like they're going right over your head. That's
No.
going to be problematic from a biological standpoint, because the mitochondria are very sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies. They actually evolved to sense natural EMFs through the process of their development. Melanin itself absorbs the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And so if we're talking about melanin being conserved for hundreds of millions of years, there was no non-native EMF prior to whatever time frame, past 100 or so years. So it directly destroys melanin and it alters the way it functions. And then you also talk about the non-visual photoreceptors, which are also light sensing mechanisms. I mean, it's just problematic from every angle, especially when you consider that the mitochondria are found, especially in the brain. Melanin is found in the brain, the substantia nigra. You have opsins also there. So it's basically just, from my standpoint, it's annihilating people from a biological cellular standpoint. And that is reflected in the symptoms that people are experiencing. I mean, you could talk about tinnitus, headaches, all sorts of things can manifest as a result of non-native EMF exposure. And I find it interesting that people have come to me and DM'd me personally that, once they've put in the AirPods, they started using them, they start to notice these symptoms. Once they take them away, those symptoms are gone. And so I think it points us in that direction. And most importantly, I was actually watching Apple's new keynote on the new AirPods, and they were talking about how it's such an upgrade in terms of improving health and avoiding hearing loss and whatnot.
What?
Um, and I was like, well, you guys stand to earn a lot of money off of this, and it's ironic that the very thing you say is helping improve health or at least protect you from like hearing loss or whatnot, is actually causing it, knowing what we know about the biology behind it. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of angles you can take it from. I mean, the research on non-native EMF goes back to like the late 1800s.
hmm Yeah, I mean, there's research on humans showing that it destroys glucose tolerance, raises insulin levels. You look at Dr. Gerald Pollack's work, which I reference a lot, and how Wi-Fi, those non-native EMF frequencies can bring down exclusion zone water 15 to 20%. And like all the cells in your body essentially, and the mitochondria, inner membrane and outer membrane is surrounded by exclusion zone water. It's basically your body's water battery. And when you become dehydrated, like dehydration is at the root of most chronic diseases, conditions, histamine intolerance, all of these things have a histamine or have a dehydration component. And I think like that's an underlooked, underexplored thing that we're dealing with all these iPads, AirPods, Apple Watches, things that are close to our vital organs, the heart, the brain, the ovaries, where we have the most mitochondria. We're putting these devices to out of the sake of convenience, and now that's hilarious that they're saying it's going to be health promoting. Like,
Yeah, now they're going to start implementing them. I mean, they're going to start using them as hearing aids, I believe. And so,
oh
like,
no.
I mean, you're
Yeah, and
talking
I get
about
a lot of people with, I'm sure you got this too. A lot of people with hearing aids are like, well, I've got Bluetooth in my hearing aid. What do I do? I'm like, turn it off if you can. But some people can't. And it's like,
it's such a tough
there's,
thing they're going to be in.
yeah, that's really tough, and then you got to look at the work of Dr. Martin Picard and stress and the mitochondria. And it's like, there's a balance, is it going to stress you out that you can't hear everything and you're not going to have any good quality of life? You kind of have to weigh checks and balances. There's not really an easy answer to that one, other than can you find a hearing aid that doesn't have Bluetooth? Like I would hope, just like Daly's contacts, they don't block UV. There's got to be one brand of hearing aid that doesn't have Bluetooth. So if anybody knows that, feel free to
Yeah.
drop it in the comments for my hearing aid people. But yeah, I just don't think people, I think it's one of those things, like it's a form of light, that you can't see. And because people can't see it, they think it's not actually real and it doesn't do anything to health. But I mean, it is, at this point, there is ample scientific data to show like this is really impacting your health negatively, right?
Yeah. And I came at this actually from the perspective when I first started going into this work that I was inherently skeptical, or I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't care enough, or I didn't know enough to actually care about it. And so I have the relative experience there, but really what blew my mind open was Robert O'Becker's work on
Oh yeah. Body
magnetism.
electric. Yep.
When you when you look through the science, it's one thing. When
Mm-hmm.
you read like I haven't actually read this yet, but when Andrew Marino and then Robert O. Becker together, I forgot what the book was called. When you look at the financial gain, the
Mm-hmm.
power dynamics within this discussion, these large conglomerates who want to, spread a certain agenda, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
obvious we've been lied to, especially when you consider
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the electromagnetic work has actually come from, Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
You have other compartments that have been very integral to this whole process. So it's a non-negotiable to take non-native EMF practices into account. And you want to protect yourself as much as possible. You want to ground, you want to maintain a healthy sleep sanctuary, you want to get sunlight, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And the inverse square law, because I think like we're not going to be able to stop people from building towers and satellites and those sorts of things. So just don't sleep with the Wi-Fi router next to your head. Don't sleep with your phone plugged in next to your body. Like create distance, put it in the next room with the ringer on if you have to hear the phone ring in the middle of the night because you've got a loved one. Like that's what we do. And like our bathroom is pretty far away from the bed and we can still hear the phones if we need to, if one of our parents is needing us in the night. So, because I've been doing this for a few years now. I've heard every single excuse as to why they can't implement this stuff. Except this weekend, I did get a woman that was really upset on one of my posts that she's like, I've got a really annoying toddler and I have to wear AirPods. It's the only way I can survive. And I'm like,
God,
I have a
that's
16-year-old autistic child who runs around the house, like making all kinds of crazy loud noises, and a toddler boy who is like going through a tantrum phase right now. Like, don't like, I just, you know what? Like, no, I
some
can't
people
hear
can't
it.
be saved. Some people can't be saved.
No, they just don't, they're not ready for it. I think that what's important is that we keep putting out the information, and when people are ready to hear it, like I wasn't ready to hear it. I had a carnivore account. Like my whole Instagram was about being carnivore, and like it had stopped working. It was clear if you look at my YouTube videos, this shit's not working for her, but we're going to keep watching her videos because I think people just liked me as a person. And so they were like, we'll just keep, we'll keep watching and listening. And then when I was trying to get pregnant, that's when the shoe dropped. And I'm like, oh, maybe carnivore is not the be all end all. Oh, crap. And that's when I found everything with light. That's when someone said, hey, and I had people coming in my comments being like, you need to get rid of those AirPods. You need to stop doing all the artificial light at night. And I'm like, you people are so stupid. Like I would get so irritated by the blue light people. I'm like, you guys need to just shut up and go away, mind your own business. And then finally, and one of them, my friend Kelly, she's the one who introduced me to Jack to come on my podcast. This is the only time I've ever talked to Jack was that one podcast. But she introduced me to Jack to come on the podcast, and she had been in my DMs during the pandemic, like, got to get rid of those AirPods. They're not good for you. And I was like, please go away. I didn't ask your stupid opinion. Like, I was so mad. And now here I am, like a few years later, like, don't wear AirPods. I don't want to hear it if you've got an annoying toddler. Like, it's not good for your health. And so, like, I think we just keep putting the information out there, and when people are ready for it, they'll take it on and they'll do it. It's like
Yeah.
it's so hard to get someone to be ready, to force them to get into that place of desperation.
Yeah, which is why I think it's very important for educators in the space to be able to hold their feet to the fire and really like check in, like, am I actually doing enough to understand this work? Am I
Mhm.
tackling certain beliefs or am I improving certain standards within how I actually teach this stuff? That's
Mhm.
always important because I'm very obsessive with how I approach this stuff. And it's just so much work to sift through. There's so many studies to dive into. And there's so much like knowledge base you have to build just on the scientific basis. Like you understanding in vitro versus in vivo, understanding the
Yes.
hierarchy of scientific evidence. I mean, it's daunting, which is why I think we play a pivotal role here. And most importantly, what I want health educators in the space to do more is to actually have discussions with people who are more centralized, especially the big players. And
Mhm.
try to tackle those ideas head on because that's something that's very important in this day and age.
I agree. It's definitely a fine line to walk of like wanting to educate people and then just wanting to kind of like be like, oh, why aren't you getting this? And why are you still having the same conversation about food when there's just so much more to it? But yeah, the scientific study thing, I think that's huge because people will just pull up a study and say, here, look at this. This proves my point. And you're right. Was it in vitro? Was it in vivo? Was it done on a nocturnal hairless animal? Like, and that's how we're going to prove the point for this to be applicable for a human. Like, there's so many variables when it comes to sifting through scientific data and and then there's the clinical experience as well, because when you actually start talking to people, when you see people implementing this into their life, you also have to change a lot of things as well. I don't know if you've experienced that and been like humbled by the end user of like, okay, we gotta make this a little more clear, meet people where they are a little bit more. Have you had that experience just yet?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't recall a specific example, but yeah, I'm sure I've been humbled plenty of times in this work. I think
Oh
that
yeah.
I'm the type who likes to start off at the deep end, and then I
Mm-hmm.
like to reverse engineer towards the more simple stuff because again, like I said, if you I feel like if you oversimplify the work, you just lose out on all the magic. Like if somebody's
Mm-hmm.
gonna follow this, if I just say watch sunrise, like what kind of inspiration does that create for people to then have it become a sustainable practice?
Yep.
And so it's like, yeah, I mean, in my teaching style is definitely something that I've learned to refine and improve and try to meet people at their level while also maintaining my desire to focus on the deep end stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, you're right. Because if you just tell people, like when I put up posts like that on Instagram, I think half the time people roll their eyes. But then in the caption, I'm trying to explain like what this is doing to turn on HPA and HPG axes. And if you have hormone imbalance, how that's actually going to support pregnenolone going down the right pathway instead of going all down the cortisol pathway, and how, you know, the bump of artificial light at night also causes hormone imbalances, because it's always a fine line of walking to say, how can I get people to be interested in this information, yet give it like scientific basis and not, not dumb it down too much? Because yeah, it's definitely, I'm always playing that dance personally on with content, because it can't, it can be, it's a lot of information for people to understand, I think, and it's a different paradigm to look at.
Yeah. I would urge, I don't know, it depends on the person you're talking to, but maybe don't start
Yeah.
on biophoton emission and whatnot.
Oh no. No, definitely not. I mean, and some people don't want to know that. They just want to know, like, how can I feel better? How can I sleep better? How can I stop having to track, weigh, and measure all my food and count my steps and like do 2 hours of CrossFit and still like look good, feel good, and sleep good? How can I do that? And so that's where you have to, I think, simplify it to an extent. And if they want to know more, then have that deeper information available to them. So it's, yeah, it's definitely a lesson for sure.
Yeah. But educators have a tough battle ahead of them. I'm telling you
Yeah.
that, like, and I'm sure you've gone through this as well. Like the sheer pushback
Oh yeah.
and stuff that you have to sift through in order to even get this work out to like 1% of the masses, it takes a
Oh yeah.
lot. So
It
if any
does.
yeah, if anybody's thinking about becoming an educator in this space, they really have to just become obsessed with it and focus on it for life, basically. If they want to make some huge sustainable like changes here.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's I think more and more people are going to be turned on to this as we continue to see a decline in health and like the standard advice not working for people. I think people are going to be more and more illuminated, if you will, to this advice. And so, yeah, I think the more of us talking about it, the better, because I always say this. I have a couple of colleagues, and we all put the information out differently. And it's like, to me, I try not to look at it as like a competition thing. It's just like, someone's going to hear it from me and understand it. Maybe they've already heard it from my other two friends, and they're just like, I don't get it. Like, she's PhD, like it's way over my head. Like I can't grasp this. Or I think people need to hear it who they need to hear it from, which is like goes back to the original. Like my husband, I've been telling him about, because he's never worn AirPods.
Like he saw me, he used to see me wear them and he was like, oh God, I know those are not good for you. I don't know why, but I just know those aren't good for you. But
Yeah.
he had to hear you talking about the AirPods to be like, oh, I get it. Like, so I think everyone they'll connect with the person that they're supposed to. So I think that's why it's so good for all of us to continue doing this work and supporting each other. I don't feel the same yet. Things that I felt like kind of in the food space where it was like, let me stomp on somebody else to like make myself look better. Like I don't see that so much in this space, like I said, yet, because it's pretty young, but hopefully
Don't
we can
don't
keep it
come
that
to
way.
don't come to Twitter because there's plenty of that. I've
Oh
honestly
yeah.
been guilty of it sometimes. That's part of my evolution as a character and person. But yeah, I think it's as long as we can just focus on curiosity, education, and really raising people up. I think that's the most important thing. We'll be totally fine, and hopefully we'll make a dent in this work.
I hope so. Well, what's next for you? I know you're working on wrapping up a course. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that and then ways people can find you if they want to follow your work.
So yeah, the 80-20 course, it's based off the idea of Pareto's principle. 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort. And that's really how I view circadian biology. I think it could honestly be deemed as like 90-10, 95-5. But the point is, like, it's going to get you a lot of great results if you just focus on this one fundamental area of health. And so
Mhm.
that's basically like an entire compilation of all the work and the research that I've done over the past few years. All the scientific research that I've sifted through, I put in there. I've organized it systematically. We talk about, like, skin cancer and full light spectrum from the sun, a little bit of electromagnetism and water, although I don't understand those areas as well as I do with the circadian stuff. And so that's basically a resource that I want for people to go to and treat like a buffet and really get the most out of this work. I feel like that if you can have a nice course that somebody can get and they can use that going forward, that's going to have huge implications for how we get this work across to the masses. So that's been a big thing for me. And then that's also tied to the company that I'm working with called the Meta Warrior, which is where we want to have a more comprehensive approach to healthcare and just overall optimization for both athletes and citizens. We like to work off of Plato's ideal citizen philosophy, which is like, not only do you have to be intellectual and philosophical and have curiosity, but I think you also have to be fit, be healthy. I think that sets a good example for the people in this country, and working with athletes, working with regular people, trying to bring a lot of the circadian stuff to the forefront in person is something that I'm working on actively, and it's a battle trying to get it across to people who have no idea what circadian biology is. You have to take your time. You have to make sure your stuff is dialed in, and so that's mainly what I'm focused on. And then the 2 a.m. podcast is also something where it's more fun, more conversational pace with my co-host, and yeah, it's pretty much it.
Nice. Well, I'll make sure to get all of your links to put them down in the show notes so we can share those with anybody listening who wants to follow you, your work, and stay tuned for your upcoming course. And thanks for coming on today. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope my community learned something today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.